Well, this is Lecture 11, Part 5, and I'm having to redo this one because it came out too long and would not post to YouTube. So I may inadvertently repeat something I've already said in 4 or 6, but I'm having to go back and redo this thing. I'll keep a closer eye on the timer this time. So actually, in 4 I had finished with the Tennessee Valley Authority that makes the dams, but I wanted to go back and add something in. It had slipped my mind to mention this because it's not on the PowerPoint, but it's something you should know about. And the Agricultural Adjustment Act made me think of this. So one of the things that's going on during this time of a depression is an environmental disaster known as the Dust Bowl. Now, the Dust Bowl really, it has something to do with depression in that it's going on at this time, but it's nothing to do with, like the economy crashes and then dust blows up. It's just a coincidental thing, but it certainly added to the suffering out west. So the Dust Bowl was involved a drought. It was hitting places like particularly Oklahoma, parts of Texas, going up a little further as well, like Arkansas, I think, part of it. What happened because of poor farming techniques that loosened topsoil, and then we had a drought, and then a lot of the topsoil just kind of blew away, and so we get these large, literally brown clouds of dust. And this happens in West Texas sometimes even today. But this was an environmental problem because a lot of farms lost, their fertility. So we're already dealing with a rough economy, and now you're a farmer in Oklahoma, and your topsoil's blowing away, and so the farm is not feasible anymore. So this is something that was going on top of everything else, and you mentions it in the book. Okay? But I want to make sure you knew about it because it's a pretty famous event, and it ties in with the Depression. So it's called the Dust Bowl. Okay, you should know that. All right. Now, if you're in Oklahoma and your farm is gone belly up, and what you know is agricultural work, where could you go? What might you do? Where could you try to find employment? Well, a lot of them, I'm not saying everybody, but this became a famous thing. A lot of Oklahomans moved to California because there's an agriculture industry in California that wasn't suffering the drought, and so people headed out that way to try to get jobs as farmhands. Now, if you were going from Oklahoma to California, how would you get there? Well, you'd pack up everything you have left in your car or your truck, and you would head down Route 66. And this is very famous because there's a very famous American novel based on this. Some kids end up reading it in high school. Maybe it'll be the assigned reading in a lit class, maybe an AP class. I'm not saying I've never read it. It's one of these books that's so famous that you should know about it, even if you haven't read it. It's by John Steinbeck. It's The Grapes of Wrath. Okay, so it might show up one of these days on your reading list, maybe when you're a senior or something. Maybe not. There's also a movie with Henry Fonda. I actually haven't seen it. So I would like you to know that. So having gone back and filled that in, let's move forward to the next slide, shall we? So, TVA. Okay, opposition to the first New Deal. The government is spending a lot of money. They're doing a lot of new regulations. They're telling businesses what they can or can't do. Okay? And so this will cause pushback from the right, from conservatives. And one group that does this is the American Liberty League. The American Liberty League is more or less a right-wing conservative type group, and they're worried that the New Deal is running up the deficit. They're spending a lot of money, but more importantly, the government is getting involved in the day-to-day life of the civilians, okay, or the citizens, I should say. I have a quote with this. Let me get this quote here. Now, somebody involved in this, one of the fellows who was involved in this, was a guy named Herbert Hoover, a former president. Now, Hoover wrote a book called The Challenge to Liberty. And I have a couple of quotes from it here. I haven't read this book, but I have some quotes here from it. Okay. Hoover writes, quote, "The wounds to liberty and to the justice upon which liberty rests, and these monetary actions and policies are thus myriad. It is again a specific demonstration of a social philosophy defensible only on the ground that the citizen is but the pawn of the state, the negation of a whole philosophy of liberty." End quote. Okay? So what's Hoover saying here? A lot of these new laws are being passed are very complicated. They're setting up a huge federal bureaucracy where unelected, regulators are coming in and telling you, how much food you can grow or what you're supposed to build. Do you get a chance to vote for these people? And so this is a concern that the government is becoming, involved in people's day-to-day lives. Now, maybe for good cause or hopefully with good results, but there's no doubt that they're definitely kind of interfering with the way people live their lives in some cases. So the problem here, and so here's another quote. Hoover says he's worried about this national regimentation. Okay, he says it could lead to, quote, "government direction, management, and dictation of social and economic life. Is it a vast shift from the American concept of human rights, which even the government may not infringe, to those social philosophies where men are wholly subjective to the state. It is a vast casualty to liberty if it shall be continued." End quote. So does Hoover have a point? I think he does. I'd like to read this book someday. Think about it. Next thing you know, the government might be telling you that you have to buy health insurance. Okay, you don't have any choice in the matter. It'll automatically deduct it out of your pay, right? Because it's for your own good. There's different. That's a different thing. But anyway, we got Mayor Bloomberg in New York. Oh, you can't buy a 32-ounce drink. Now that's the local government, not the federal. But it's a philosophy. It's a mindset. The government, will have to make decisions for you because you're not capable of making them yourself. Right? So I think Hoover has a point. Now, some people portray the American Liberty League as a far right-wing radical organization looking to overthrow Roosevelt. I think that's a fringe opinion. I've heard people express that. I've done a smidgen of research into it. Apparently there was like one guy saying that this was some kind of plot. But if you put 3 or 4 or 5 or 10,000 people in an organization, there's going to be a couple over in the corner, talking crazy talk. That's just how it works. I've never seen anything, conclusive or refutable. That I would put my strength in, not trust in, that this was some kind of proto-fascist organization. I don't think Herbert Hoover would be involved in it. But there's always somebody claiming that this is what's going on. The reason I mention this is I had one of the other history instructors once. I was outside his classroom waiting to go in, and he was talking about the American Liberty League wanting to overthrow Roosevelt, etc. And I thought he was a little bit out there on the fringe. Okay. Anyway, that's right-wing criticism, conservative criticism of Roosevelt. It's easy to see where they're coming from. New Deal's spending a lot of money. It's getting a lot of regulations. It's getting involved in people's lives. But there's also criticism coming from the left side of the equation. There's people that think that Roosevelt is not doing enough. Yeah? There's usually 3 people given as left-wing critics of the New Deal. One is not on the PowerPoint, so he won't be on the test, but I'll mention him just because you might see him in the textbook and wonder, why didn't I mention that? There's a guy named Charles Coughlin, who was a priest. He had a show on the radio, and he was always talking about that the government needed to do more to help poor people, unemployed people. Right? But the 2 that are on the outline here that are fair game for the test, one is Dr. Francis Townsend, who was a dentist, if I recall. Now, Townsend had a proposal for an old age pension. He wanted the government to give people over the age of 65, I think it was $200 a month, if I recall, for no other reason than the fact that they're old. There was apparently one qualification in this plan. You had to spend the money. You weren't supposed to just put it in the bank. So what's the idea here? Well, I've never read up on Townsend's plan in deep detail. I don't know how thoroughly he explained it. But a lot of old people just can't work anymore. Their health has failed, and they're having a hard time making ends meet. And they're trying to get some money to pay rent. Okay? So that would help those people. There could be some other layers to this too, and I'm just logicking this out based on common sense. I've never actually read Townsend's plan, but think about it. If you have to spend the money, you're stimulating the economy. Okay, if you just don't put it in the bank. Okay, you're supposed to go out and spend it. So maybe that helps some businesses. Have some cash coming in. Another thing it might do is it might allow some people to retire. I mean, there's people who are healthy enough at age 65 that they can work, and they are working because they need the money. But now, if you pay them $200, maybe they can quit their jobs, and then that could free up a job for a younger person who's trying to support a family. So I think there's multiple layers to this Townsend proposal. So he's one of the big ones. So this, of course, is kind of like Social Security, but not exactly. We'll get to Social Security in a couple of slides. And then the most flamboyant left-wing critic of Roosevelt is a guy named Huey Long, who's a Louisiana politician. Okay? Now, Huey Long was governor of Louisiana, then he was a senator later. He had a proposal for a new tax code where he wanted to tax away the high-end earnings of people that could make like $1 million a year. Anything over that would be totally confiscated by the government. They could have a net fortune of $5 million a year. Then he was going to roll that money back and pay people on the low end a basic wage or a basic stipend. Okay, so I mean, literally, you're just going to take money from the rich, give it to the poor. Now, this is the kind of thing that can make you really popular with poor people. It's also the kind of thing that can tick off the rich. But there really aren't that many rich people. So, if you lose their vote, how many votes have you actually lost? Of course, they'll donate money to see about defeating you in the election. I gave a pretty good explanation of this on the first video, but then it can end up being too long. So I'll just skip over it here and get to the point, because you'll get to read a reading about Huey Long. I'm going to put one up on Canvas that goes with this lecture, so you can read all about Huey Long and some of his ideas. The significant thing about him is some people think he might be considering running against Roosevelt for the Democratic nomination for the next election. We'll never know because somebody assassinates him. Okay? And apparently not for political reasons, apparently for personal. Okay? So like I said, I could spend some time talking about Huey Long, but then this video will run over, and then I'll have to re-record it another time, and then I don't have to redo number 6, so let's just call it a day here. You can read about Huey Long, both in the textbook, I'm sure he's in there, and like I said, I will put up a reading about Huey Long on Canvas. So this ends part 5, and we'll transition into part 6.